Okay, folks, welcome to this meeting of the Internationalist Communist Tendency, whatever it says on the board outside. I'm Jock, I'm from the Communist Workers' Organisation, which is the British affiliate of the ICT. I'm very proud to have alongside me Alexis Blanchard, who is a member of the Groupe Internationaliste Ouvrière, which is the
Internationalist Worker Group.
Thanks for the translation. Our affiliate in Canada. He's also been a member of the main student striking bodies and student groupings, ASA and CLASA. You'll hear him talk a lot about these. In fact, there's a lot of acronyms, which I think he'll explain as we go along, which may be a bit confusing for people. Alexis is also here to learn English, although his English is very good. He doesn't mind if anybody asks a question you won't stop him. Just ask a question, he'll answer it if you're not sure what he's actually saying. And so I'll give the floor to you.
Okay. So as I said, my name is Alexis. I wasn't a member of the Internationalist Tendency during the student strike. I led the strike. I've profoundly changed my perspective on class struggle, as at the time I defined more myself as a communist with no adjective, with strong operaismo influence and strong libertarian influence too. So to beginning, I will give you a short view of what Quebec is, because it's a really particular place in the world. To give you an example, Quebec was always, as one of our philosophers, Guy Vadeboncoeur, said, Quebec is always on the antechamber of history. To give you an example, separation of the church and state happened at the beginning of the 60s. In Britain or in France, it happened at the beginning of the 20th century. To give you that, and the main question in Quebec is politically, historically, is the question about is the national question, because you have historically a national oppression. From the francophone are traditionally oppressed by the anglophone minority, and class privilege are in the last century really construct around the idea that Catholic and French speaker are workers and English speaker are generally boss, except if they are Irish or Scottish. Now they're in the side of the French. Traditionally is that. So, but in the last 20 years, you have tranquilly the cleavage is switching from the old left-wing or right-wing debate, and the national question is falling in disinterest because a lot of immigration from countries who don't have this question before. Also, for the young generation, a lot of us speak English, have friends in English Canada, or simply find that a little bit of analysis saying that national independence in a global capitalist world doesn't mean nothing anymore. So we'll think like that. Also, on the political side, on the political organization, you have four major political forces. You have the Liberal Party, who was in power during the student strike. The Liberal Party is basically like your Tories, to give you that, even if they're called liberal. They're on social aspect, they're really liberal, but they're totally neoclassicist economists. They're again intervention of state in the economy. They're for cutting the public sector, things like that. You have the Parti Québécois, a Quebecer party, who is the nationalist independentist party, who have a social democratic background, but is social democrat like the Labour is social democrat, so not at all, simply. And you have the CAQ, with a party with a very postmodern party, is Coalition for the Future of Quebec, is a non-ideological party. Their only thing is they are pragmatic, but pragmatic doing by making the capitalist economy working. But they say they are not ideological. They are only for that everything is supposed to work in a better way, therefore efficiency and basically they are totally empty as a political program. And you have Quebec Solidaire. Quebec Solidaire is a Quebec version of the new anti-capitalist parties, French, is a regrouping of all the left possible. You have old Trotskyists, new type of ecological bourgeois bohème. You have old Social Democrat, old Stalinist. You have, I think, 5 Trotskyist tendency in that party, and all the old Unionist people are in that Quebec Solidaire party. And into the radical side, you have three main organizations. Before the strike, after the strike, the face will totally change. You have the Libertarian Communist Union, is the Quebec section of NEFAC, Northeast Federation of Anarcho-Communists. They are platformist, Libertarian Communist. You have the Revolutionary Communist Party, was at the time one of the most influential organizations in the extreme left, or Maoist. Pro Shining Path, pro Nepal Revolution, pro Naxalite Party, and you have the CLAC. CLAC is the Convergency of Anti-Capitalist Struggle. They say they're not an anarchist organization, but they are is a regroupment of all anti-capitalists, but they have kicked out all the Marxists. So basically, it's an anarchist organization. And you have and on the union side, you have three main big union. Federation, FTQ, Federation of Labour of Quebec, was the Quebec branch of the IFL-CIO. For the one who knows, a big American union. You have the CSN, National Confederation of Union, was traditionally the more is the next Catholic union, who was transformed in a Marxist-Leninist union by the Maoists in the 70s, and now is like the leftist but not so left union. Is like close to the CGT in France, sort of thing like that. And you have the CSQ, who is basically between the two, is not more is a center ideological union. And finally, on the student side, you have 4 associations. You have the FEC and FERC, with Federation for University Student and Federation for Collegial Student. They are, the only description you can give to this union is corporatist, because they're not really left-wing, they're not really right-wing, they're for student interest only. To give an example, they participated in a student strike in 1996, and their main proposition was lowering the teacher salary to freeze the tuition fees. Is basically that. They are generally ultra-corporatist, anti-democratic, and they're known as the backstabber in the student movement. You have the TASEC, with the consultation table of university, with a federation who don't have any political position, just regrouping student and campuses, and they need a 2/3 vote to have any political position, so they never have to take any political position in their existence. And you have the ASSE, with ASSE was created in 2001 after the Seattle meeting. I think it's really altermondialism. Basically, ASSE was made by anarchists and Maoists in the student movement who want to create a confederation to fight FEC and FERC. His main ideology is what we call combat unionism. They're for direct democracy, they're for direct action, strike, anything like that. The student movement have some particularity in Quebec. We have, for first, the student organized in 2 things. The CEGEP was College of General and Technical Studying, because before going to university you have to have a pre-university course in Quebec, and those institutions are also technical colleges mixed between, so you have technical student and pre-university student studying together. And you have the big university, who are generally cut in two parts: public French university and English semi-private university. Really rich, and who are and politically they are two worlds. For example, French university act really like the French movement in France, French student movement in French, and McGill or Concordia have exactly the same politic movement and type of organization than in United States, like a lot of identity politics or things like that in them. And the three main institutions in the student movement at every union local level, because every student is mandatory member of his union. You have to pay your union cotization. You have the closed shop, but the closed campus thing. So you're a student, you're a member of your union. You don't have the right to say, I don't want to be a member of a union. You have to pay your fees to your union. So you have three main institutions. The General Assembly, who basically, depending on which, but in the essay, the General Assembly is the main decision point. What is, Vox, we say Vox Assembly, Vox Dei, as a joke. If the Assembly votes something, it legally must be applied by the student union, because you have legally the right to sue your union if you don't apply the decision of the Assembly. You have the Mobilization Committee, which is a group of militant people who try to bring people to the General Assembly and to pass political position into the union. And you have the Strike Council. The Strike Council exists only during a strike. It's between the General Assembly and between the Mobilization Committee and the Executive Office, because you have also an Executive Office. It's a group where people organize the strike and debate about questions related to the strike. So, and the fact is that strike committee are open to non-member of the union. So you can have participating in a student strike, you can have workers, you can have students from other school who can give, they generally can't vote, but they can speak to the strike committee. So that generally is a really interesting structure to do political work in on that. So the history of the student strike, the student movement in Quebec, start in 2010 when the Liberal Minister of Finance named Raymond Bachand decided, convoke all the media and say we need a cultural revolution in Quebec. And when a journalist raised an hand and said, cultural revolution is not a thing from Mao, and say, I don't want a cultural revolution like Mao, more something like May 68 in France.
68.
Yeah, May 68. So we're okay, but in fact, his revolution was austerity. You have three main bills on this austerity program: a raise of tuition fee, at the time wasn't known. Tarification of the public health sector, because in Canada the health sector is totally free for everything you need, except some medication need to be paid if you're born in Canada. The tarification, so you have two main tarification things. You have a tax of $400 for with no relation with your income. So if you are on benefit or if you won $300,000 a year, you have to pay $400 a year to have access to the healthcare system. And every time you just cross the door of an hospital, you have to pay $25 to enter in a hospital to have a consultation. That's the main point. And the rise of electricity bill, of electricity tariff, electricity price. And in Quebec, with the winter, we have a rise of electricity prices, generally devastating for working class family, just because I managed for
just one. I mean, who provides? How is electricity provided? I mean, here there's lots of different companies.
Okay, yeah, but you have one public company named Hydro-Quebec. Exactly, it's totally public. So where the government raised that at the time of austerity. And generally it is devastating in Quebec because we have at minus 40, you need a good electricity price. So the answer to that, the social response, will be called by the assay. The assay will try to regroup a combative union around him in the worker groups and housing committees and unemployed group, women's group around himself. It will call for a day of protest, the 1st of April 2010. It will be the first battle against austerity in Quebec. The first day against austerity will be the 1st of April. You're going to have, for that day, 60,000 students in strike for that day. You're going to have a protest of approximately 12,000 people in Montreal, and that would result with the occupation of the Bus Council and the World Trade Center in Montreal at the end of the day. And the campaign with that will always will continue, but at the time you have also, after the 1st of April, the beginning of the collective bargain of the public sector employees in Quebec. Because in Quebec, you only have the right to strike if you are in collective bargaining. It's the only place you have, but you don't have the scabbing is illegal in Quebec too. To give you, scabbing is illegal. Illegal. You can scab. Yeah. And if you are a boss and you asking for a scab, you can be put in jail sometime. Yeah, but the fact is they have made a law in the sense that it's really complicated to be convict of hiring scab, but technically
the jails are full of bosses that have been.
No, no. And I think you can't, but never be something like that. So so is why strike is only allowed in collective bargaining. So for many people, the time of this collective bargaining of the public sector is really important, because public sector is the main employer in Quebec. Is 500,000 employees in the public sector. It's basically a little bit less than a third of the workforce in Quebec is in the public sector. So for many people, it's a time to try what we call in Quebec a social strike, because we don't never say general strike in Quebec. In a political strike, we say social strike. A general strike in Quebec, a factory can go in general strike. General strike would just mean that one sector vote for the strike. In general, you can have a general strike in wine factory or general strike in the construction sector, but it's Quebec vocabulary. I know that in England it's different a little bit. So to try to go in social strike, but the union will rapidly sign a shitty deal with the bosses. To give example, the main point of this collective bargaining is now that in Quebec, the wage of the public sector worker follow the growth of the GDP. So depending how the GDP grow, the state give that much of augmentation. If the GDP doesn't grow, but the worker don't have any augmentation, increase, yeah, increase. And the other side, you have also a lot of really cheap attack against the worker who are made during this. For example, you have the in the health sector, you have the beginning of the implementation of the Toyota method. For example, in some hospitals in Quebec, now they try to implement that when a nurse is changing the diaper of a patient, you have a guy with a stopwatch behind them and counting the time that the nurse. Yeah, exactly. So we have a terrorization of public sector, and especially in the health sector, is completely ridiculous. So you have those type of implementation, and this shitty deal will put some worker to be really angry at their union, but also to try to fight from themselves. To give an example, 5 months after the collective bargaining in a little small hospital in the western part of Montreal, Lakeshore, you have 800 nurses who wildcat again the implementation of the Toyota method. And Toyota method is still not being applied in that hospital. But you have 800 nurses just walking out and sitting at the front of the hospital. Or in the construction sector, we follow the collective bargaining, you have a lot of wildcat of worker going out spontaneously in 2011 for demanding increase that the union will, because the union say to their worker, not to strike, but wait for the signal, and many workers say, the signal is pretty late, we want to fight, to still fight, so you have those fights, and that finally the union will sign, the movement will crumble, but you have, after 2011, you have this burst of worker combativity, come out a little bit of nowhere for many of us. At the time, we don't know where they come really, except that, yeah, worker usually revolt, but it's been a long time since they do that. And in 2011, 2011 will pass 2011. You have also another thing. The price of the tuition hikes, education tuition hike, will be given by the government. The price of the tuition hike will be now 75% of augmentation of tuition. So increase. Sorry, 75% increase. Basically is $1,625 of augmentation on 5 years. 5 years, so it's 325 every year of augmentation. For a lot of students, it's basically, I think for 10,000 students, it's basically saying that they cannot afford university anymore and they have to drop out their class. And for a vast majority of students, it's just have a big loan and a big debt.
Do they have grants? Do students get grants and/or loans, or they just privately work their way through?
They got grant and loan, but the fact is that grant and loan are not adjusted to inflation.
Right.
So they have tendency to be really less than what they really.
So there are some grants, and then there are loans.
Yeah, exactly. But you have a lot of weird critters to have access to loans and grants. That is really difficult to have access. To give an example, you have to not live with your parent to have access to grounds, but the definition for living with your parents is really strange. To give an example, if you have a train line between the town of your parent and you're in Montreal and your parent at Saint-Jérôme, you have a train line between the two, you're still living with your parents because you have a train line between the two. So it's kind of difficult to have access. In ground. They
assume that if you could, then you are.
Yeah, exactly. But
they
assume so. They have this mass augmentation.
Tell everybody about the marriage.
Oh yeah, and
weddings.
Yeah, a way to don't have to pay to be considered as autonomous and to not live with your parent is to get married. So in fact, in Quebec, you have a lot of students who get married at the beginning of their degree and get divorced at the end.
I didn't understand the French when I was reading it, that they were all marrying, that blokes who were not gay were marrying each other.
Yeah, but with gay marriage is really useful now. You marry your roommate to have access to education. It's really common to be married when you're a student in Quebec because it's a way to have grant. With the augmentation, the assay will call another day of strike. You're going to have 80,000 students striking, protests of approximately 10,000 students will finish in occupation of the Council of the Chancellor of University. Pretty harsh battle that day. Personally, got 2 finger fracture and 2 ribs broke by a policeman. But it's the first time in my life where I see people charging a picket line and basically non-political picket line, police line, and basically non-political, just random student who charge spontaneously against a picket line. So it's a good day to give another picket line, a police line, trying to distance this to separate the two. That gave a pretty good momentum to the assay after that day, the 31 March 2011. But also the assay decided to retreat a little bit because the government, the other part of the social movement, are not as combative as a student, and they don't want to go in direct action or things like that. So the assay will fall back on the other demands like the health sector or the electricity, and we'll take a corporatist side saying that they want to concentrate on the tuition rise. personally I think is a mistake, but at the time it was because all the social movement was completely dead, except the student movement. And the student movement will try another day of demonstration on the 10th of November 2011. That day will be the biggest single day of student strike in Quebec history. You're going to have more than 100,000 students in strike with a 30,000 student protest into Montreal. The day will finish in a urban guerrilla warfare into the McGill campuses, the big English university. That day will be really important for many things. First, because it's the first time in history that you have English students voting the strike in the history of Quebec. You have the first time you have link between English student militant and French-speaking student militant will talk for the first time. And also McGill sees first, you have a lot of students of McGill who are cast into the real world when they're charged by a police riot cops when they just go out of their class. And also that day the assay gave an ultimatum to the government, say, okay, you have till next March to cancel tuition hike, or you will face unlimited general strike, or as my Anglo comrades are saying, you will face a HUGS, historical unlimited general strike, as they call it. So this ultimatum will result also by the assay creating the class. Class stands for large coalition of the assay. Class is basically the assay opening in structure to every student union who want to strike. Because you have a local union who are not affiliated with student federation, or even some union member of the student federation will join the assay, saying that if you want to strike, if you are for free education and you want to strike, just join the class and go and strike with us. We're here to organize a student general strike. So the class will basically double the membership of the assay at the beginning and eventually triple during the strike. And the class sent in its ultimatum, which tranquilly will result at the 11th of February 2012. The first two student associations were the Art Association at UQAM, University of Quebec, Montreal, and the Political Science and Law Association at UQAM 2, following by Humanities, will start a strike. They will be followed by a lot of departments at Université Laval. During the same week, you have some college of Vieux-Montréal, College of Saint-Laurent, who will following the strike. And on the Thursday of that week, you have a blockade of the stock exchange, and the World Trade Center in Montreal will be completely shut down by student, worker, and unemployed people. That day will have a lot of psychological influence on the new striker and the new student militant. Basically, because it's the first time that we see riot cops run for their life, because when the riot cops try to break the picket line in front of stock exchange, people just fight back and push them out. We will save comrade, we'll open cop's truck and take out our comrade outside or thing like that. So that the psychological impact of that day will be that union or student are now confident in victory after that day, and they think they can win basically because of a really grounded material, not material but physical victory against the police. Day after my cégep, the Cégep de Maisonneuve, will vote the strike. To give you an example of what the General Assembly look like, we're 6,000 in my college, my cégep, where in a General Assembly we were a little bit more than 4,000 in two gyms connect by a Wi-Fi connection for the microphone to everyone hearing the debate. And during the debate you have the security guard taking the microphone and saying, okay, we ask everyone to don't applaud during an intervention, because we seriously think that the building will collapse because of the vibration. Is why now in student movement we do jazz and the vote at Maisonneuve, you have on those 400 4,000 students, 85% will vote the unlimited general strike. You have in some really isolated town like Matane, you have le Cégep de Matane will vote at 800 students in that college. The General Assembly will be 800 students, and they will vote to go in unlimited general strike unanimously. So you have those massive vote for a strike with massive participation, and the march of people voting for the strike is gigantic, and you have this big snowball effect. Like, it's easier and easier when someone is voting the strike. It's easier for the next college to vote it because it's fashionable to be on strike now in Quebec during the month of April for students. Also, the class will try to push to radicalize the movement by launching its favorite tactic with economic disturbancy. They will occupy administrative office, block bridge, block railway tracks, road, motorway, and also during the occupation of the National Lottery building, cops will use for the first time stun grenade, because they use that a lot in Montreal now. Is basically grenade that explodes to make you deaf and blind for a couple of seconds. But the student will receive a stun grenade in the eye and lose his eyeball. It will be the first Francis Grenier will be the first martyr of the student movement. And because of the losing of the eye of Francis Grenier, you have the beginning of a really important debate during the student movement, the famous question of violence. Should we use violence? Should we not use violence? And that will be one of the main political debates during the strike. And the fact that the class constantly don't approve violence but refuse to condemn violence constantly will be constantly put on the face of the student movement, saying we don't want to negotiate with people who don't condemn firmly all type of violence. But the class, especially because of its radical element, will always say we refuse to condemn violence. Cops attack us, why the government don't condemn cops instead of students defending themselves, etc., etc. And this economic disturbancy will bring other things or kind of interesting, especially participation of non-students into the movement, especially teacher. In some economic disturbance, you have teacher making a line in front of student, protecting the student from a riot cop charge, or some nurse build network of nurse helping students after. Basically, after a street fight, you have some people who are injured, and now you have nurse taking day off or who are not working that day, who come helping the student having their first health quit and helping students who have been beat up by cops or pepper spraying or anything like that. And those economic disturbances will result ultimately into what we call the Salon du Plan Nord, North Plan meeting. North Plan is a big project in the north of Quebec. You have a lot of gold, uranium, diamond, name it, oil in the north of Quebec. And the government of Quebec is basically organizing a big meeting to gain investor, and you have capitalists from Saudi Arabia, France, China, who come in Montreal for that big meeting, saying, okay, are you going? Which part of northern Quebec are you going to buy? And basically by expelling all communities who are there, especially native people, but also complete little mining town, or now don't have any mine, or they're going to be expelled because they're building a motorway or something like that. And for the class is like a big target, because you have, okay, we want to do economic disturbance. We have the big economic event of the year in our front. So class will call to disturb this event and the Salon du Plan Nord, and that will work pretty well. You have, during 3 or 4 hours, you have a riot around the Salon du Plan Nord. The salon will be shut down. The premier, Jean Charest, will do a really bad joke about sending students as far as possible in the north during the riot. So the population will be really upset about that gulag joke from our premier. And for the first time, the government will say, okay, we'll negotiate with students. They say, and so now you have FEC, FERC, ASSE, and TASEC on the same table with the government trying to discuss. But the government say that they don't want to discuss about tuition hike, they only want to discuss about an augmentation of loan and grant. They refuse to talk about tuition hike, and they kick out the essay because the essay didn't have contained violence after. Even if the first time this first negotiation was a real big joke. Generally, negotiations are a big joke. That one part only. After that, you have also another problematic in the student movement will be the apparition of what we call the appearance, of the green square. Because in Quebec movement, student movement have the red square, with basically a little piece of a textile red, saying that we're squarely in red. Squarely in French is carrément, is full, and in red is be in depth, so we're squarely in the depth. And the green square are just posh students who are against the strike and organizing themselves as a class element to fight against students who are for the strike. And you have all those in General Assembly, really rich students going to speak at the microphone, saying that they are against the strike, it's irresponsible to go on strike, that the province is in debt, that we have to go on austerity. But suddenly you have a lot of proletarian origin students who are not so enthusiastic about the strike, who become really pro-strike after that because they see people defending the strike in their Giorgio Armani suit or
attacking the strike.
Yeah, again the strike. And many of these Green Square students ask for injunction to go in their course despite the strike, because when you have a strike, you have generally mass picket line and the university or the college is shut down completely. They ask to go to their class, so you have cops trying to break the picket line in morning with, and you have those Green Square students and a massive riot cops charging picket lines to go to their class. And because of that, you have a lot of proletarian origin students who are pissed, who discover a class struggle and are really pissed off because they see those rich kids, even if they're some are against the strike in the more proletarian, they're really pissed off. Like, okay, why that guy? Because they have the money to have a lawyer and to have cops with them. Why you have the right to go to his class? I want to go to my class too. I don't want to strike, but I will be in the picket line anyway because I find that completely ridiculous. Remember, in my college, we even have a student who study to become cops, fighting riot cops because they don't want the Green Square to go in the picket line, to pass the picket line. So that part will be interesting because in the student movement you have the appearance of a class contradiction inside the student movement. You have this class hatred who take form in General Assembly, gets worse and worse every time because you have intimidation, beat up, and generally big screaming about, because class composition of student movement is pretty 50-50 between proletarian origin and bourgeois origin. So you have this class confrontation during General Assembly, who take physically take part during General Assembly a lot more into the strike, and that would create terrible tension, injured, dead, threat, everything like that. Until the government say, okay, now it's enough. We'll stop the strike by giving a special law. A special law in Quebec is basically a law who, for a determined time, forbids striking. And they forbid student striking. I think you got something like $50,000 of fine. A fine if you find picketing on the campus, and yeah, or sometime if it's your third offense of picketing, you can go for 10 days in jail, or anything like that. And they will report the semester to the winter semester to fall, because they want to give a break between the two. But following that, the strategy of the government will completely collapse because students will massively protest and massively riot in the street after the special law, following but a lot of other people who are completely upset because the government is irresponsible. They say the government is irresponsible to not try to really negotiate with the student, and they put a special law. You have lawyer demonstration against the special law. You have.
I could just ask, so this law
Yeah.
it wasn't just related to student strike.
No, only to student strike.
Oh,
but,
only.
yeah, and it was always a forbidden protest in general.
Right.
Yeah, protests are for 1 year forbidden in Quebec because of that law.
Of any kind, not just student strike.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Only for strikes, only student strike are forbidden, but every type of protest
Yeah, yeah.
is forbidden. Yeah. So that will generate 5 big days of riot, and the 22 of March, AC will call for a mass demonstration in Montreal to again the special law, and in that protest you have to bring between 300,000 and 500,000 people protesting. And the fact you have the head of the bus council saying that day was terrible because you have so many people who call sick, who take a holiday, that basically Montreal is shut down because factories are empty because workers have all called sick to go to the protest or anything like that. Even in small town outside of Montreal, you have protests and people sick out a lot to go to those protests. And you have also other demo taking form. You have people in the working class neighborhood going out with pots and pans, knocking them in what we call casserole protest. Those casserole movements will result in neighbor assembly. You have sometimes neighbor assembly of 500 or 600 people taking, okay, now we're discussing what is the next step to go in the movement. And you have this idea of a social strike developing through those neighbor assembly. You have nurse from 3 hospitals voting to go in illegal strike in support with the student. But the union manager just shut down every tentative to go on strike, even if the vote were taken to go on strike. And frankly, you have this union apparatus trying to repress the tentative to extend the movement with the attempt to break outside the student movement. You have union leader calling for moderation, that students have to be responsible, that we need a negotiation table. And finally, the government will give a negotiation table while the union are strangling every tentative of going outside that. It will take for 8 days. The government will talk about tuition fee, but finally will concede nothing. And after 8 days, nothing happened. Students don't win anything except some augmentation of long and brand at that time. And we don't have win much. And the workers now are not, great part because of the union, they don't want to accept some really courageous individual are not really going to go on strike. You have still the neighbor assembly are there, but they're still a minority of the class. They're not. It's good to have 600 people who are in assembly to support you, but when they are in only 1 or 2 or 3 neighborhoods in Montreal, is not enough to decree a general strike. So the student movement is completely lost in that. We're completely in confusion during that moment because we never were in those type of moments before, because we're always organizing a strategy in function of student movement, to go outside the student movement. So we will try to disrupt the Formula One race in Montreal, because it's now is the main economic target to try to shut down the government. But we're more isolated than before. Where less people are badly injured, people who are juridical procedure who can protest again or anything like that. So the movement is really exhausted, and the still who are there are just completely washed up by the police, and the movement will frankly die. And the only option for many students is to restart the strike and fall when a new movement will start. But in August, the government will start an election, and saying basically, that's in a quote from the Premier Jean Charest, the street have talked, now to let the Quebecers speak. So we go in election to resolve the social crisis. And in August, happened a lot of general assembly to restart the strike. And now people are saying, okay, man, now we have a democratic way to express ourselves. We can stop striking and go voting to end the social crisis. Now you have Trotskyists, you have some anarchists, you have members of Quebec Solidaire and Parti Québécois who are ready for the strike, saying, why not give a chance to democracy and the ballot to win? It's been 7 months we're on strike, maybe it's time to give a chance to the ballot to try to win. So because of this massive break rank of social democrat element into the student movement, strike vote crumble everywhere. You have some department in l'UQAM and some department in Université de Montréal continue to strike, but especially in Université de Montréal, police will be horrible and smash out the movement. In Université de Montréal, you have riot cops in every class to be sure that they have no picketing and no disturbance of the class during that. So yeah, you have teachers giving their class with 2 riot cops every side of them, every side, and you have armed guards in the into the couloir of the university to be sure the class. So the strike is basically dead. But at the end of the election, the Parti Québécois will win the election. The Liberals are going to have an electoral defeat. And the Parti Québécois say, okay, we will put an end to austerity. They freeze tuition. They cancel the health tax. But the health tax will be reformed finally. They will not be really cancelled. Now it's proportional to your income, yeah. Proportional to your income, and you have a lot of low income who have been disrupted. It's like poll tax to community benefit, to give a British comparison. And they say to the student, okay, now we're not going to have a tuition hike. We're going to have a summit. We will invite every people, the boss, the chancellor, the union, the student union, and we will discuss together as a civil society to decide how are we going to finance our university. The summit is coming. As they decide to boycott, and because as they decide to boycott, as is backstabbed by all teacher and caretaker union, FEC and FERC are completely, in French we say yellow, but I don't think we have, in English it's the same thing.
Well, the Americans have it.
Yeah, they are blatantly the yellow union
Scab
card.
union.
Yeah, scab union card, they're licking the feet of the government. And finally the government is giving an indexation. It's basically that the tuition hikes are now rise with the rate of the consummation, cost of living. Now with the cost of living, so they are addition of 1 or 3% every year. At the end of the movement, the violent, we can say in the material way, you can say, okay, yeah, but the hike is really, really less big than the liberal propose. That suggests that kind of victory. The augmentation of loan on the ground is quite significant. Now you have more students than there ever was in Quebec because of this massive augmentation of loan and grants in Quebec. But also austerity still continue. Also tuition fees still rising, and the student movement have been a lot of problems, especially because really good militants are physically broke, are paralyzed by juridical charges against them and repression. You have also a lot of psychological problem to a lot of movement that every mass movement bring, I think. But you have also those more interesting thing, I think, was in some workplace, especially in the health sector, you have the birth of autonomous worker committee, because they want to organize outside of the union because they see that the union don't want to fight anymore. You have those neighbor assembly, who, even if some of them have died, some are still running in Quebec and Montreal. You have this contamination of student method of struggle outside the student movement. You have in Quebec now, during this year of the student strike, it was the year with the least worker strike in the history of Quebec. Now, a year after, we're breaking our record of number of strike. For example, because you have too much wildcat in the construction sector, the union organized a 2-week general strike of all the workers because they want to retake control of their workers because it's problematic for them because union officials lose their credibility. So say, okay, we have to prove to be combative. They will finally spill down because of a government's special law. The government will just back down, but they will. If you look at the comparison to what the attack of the bosses was and what the worker gained at the end, is a type of victory because of worker combativity and because the union have no choice to fight if they want to keep control of their workers. You have that in every other sector, in a lot of sectors, you have solidarity between student and worker now. Or, for example, in the little factory who made construction stock in Laval, the IWG in my group and some neighbor assembly have decided to go shut down the factory because scabbing is illegal, but to be convict of scabbing, you have to be caught by a work inspector. So basically, it's really difficult to be caught by a work inspector because they cut their number every year, things like that. And the union, at the beginning of the struggle, said to the worker, don't shut down the factory, that will bankrupt the factory and you're going to lose your job. But personally, I don't see the point to go on strike if you're not going to shut down the factory production. So we go with this neighbor assembly, we shut down the factory and make link with the workers, and workers are really happy with us and less happy with the unions. And you have those connections between struggle start to happen. So I think that is the real result of the strike, or connection with Anglo-Canadian of American student and Quebec student who now try to make connection and to organize in different way. In English Canada, politics have completely changed. You pass to really identity politic to, I would say, a mass politic idea that we have to mobilize our people and not to just work in a work hard group about this and this subject, but we need a mass organization. Into the radical left, the idea to have a political party of the working class, a non-electoral political party, is progressing. Critique of the union is completely another place. Before the strike was normal for even the more radical communists to say we have to work in the union. Now a lot of communists say, or anarchists saying the union are lost. We need an autonomous strike committee, we need a worker council. It's really common to hear that in the radical left now, and the radical left is just bigger too. So I think that's where the real victory of a strike is, this rebirth of the working class consciousness in Quebec. Since the 70s, we never have something like that. So thank you for listening. If you have a question.
Any questions? Oh.
Yeah, that was a very interesting presentation, and it's interesting, I think, because the whole thing about Quebecois, is its regionalism, and obviously the bourgeoisie, the state in Quebec, has always maintained this separate identity. And we don't know much about the class struggle in Quebec, but it's interesting that it actually comes at this particular time when we've seen struggles in Turkey, we've seen struggles in Brazil, in China, etc. And the whole Occupy movement as well. I think it's really interesting. But the question I want to ask you, comrade, is was this general strike just limited to Quebec, or did it spread to was there any reverberations in the rest of Canada, for instance, in the Ontario region, which is, I think, industrialized, around Toronto?
In form of striking, no. You have some protest and solidarity, you have some beginning of organization, but no, in form of strike, it was only limited to Quebec. I think that's one of the main weakness of the movement, wasn't be able to spread out outside the student movement in general. To give
One problem was though that the hikes in Quebec were unprecedented, whereas all the other places had
Yeah.
already had the hikes.
Exactly, for example, in Ontario, because education is a provincial without competence in Quebec. To give an example, tuition in Quebec are 1 in 10 or more tuition are in Ontario. So for a lot of Ontarian students, we're just spoiled child.
Spoiled child.
Spoiled child,
Children.
spoiled children because we're going to strike because they pay 10 times our tuition.
10 times.
Yeah, 10 times our tuition in Ontario. Or in the United States, sometimes is, I think, in some universities, 100 times the price of Quebec. In Harvard, for example, is almost 100,000 student dollar for one year of study. Yeah.
But Quebec is a much poorer, the proletariat of Quebec is poorer than anywhere else in
North America, except some black community and Latino community in the southern United States. But historically, Quebecers are called the white Negroes of America, to give you an example.
When I went there in 2000, I mean, I've been in Asia and Africa, and I felt more like a white man in a colonial country because I spoke English in Montreal than anywhere else I've ever been. Because it was quite clear that the proletariat spoke French, and the middle class, including my relatives, spoke English, and they sort of ruled the roost.
Mm. Yes, it's a historical question is really on this language, and Catholic Protestant too, but especially language in Quebec. So yeah, but that strike give the first, and because now we have an Anglophone proletariat, especially people from ex-English colony, India or Sri Lanka or some African country who come live in Quebec. So for the first time, yes, you have this English-speaking proletariat who is now a significant part of the proletariat. And I think it's a part why national question is less important now, because you have ally who are not who speak the other language now, and I think in the future it can be interesting for having link with worker outside of Quebec. But the language barrier was just complicated, and it is really hard to break because you have to learn another language to go speak to the worker from the other side of the border. That's kind of complicated. Yeah.
Could you just clarify, during the election you referred to,
Yeah.
was it the same party that got back in power?
No, it's a
I
Parti
thought you said
Québécois.
they got thrown out. Yeah.
Yeah, the Parti
So sorry, who?
The Nationalist Social Democrat Party.
Oh, right.
The
okay,
Parti
okay,
Québécois,
okay,
yeah.
So they
Char-
made
Charest
minor-
Parti
relatively minor
Royal.
adjustments to the things that people were protesting about. So it's a marginal improvement.
Yeah,
But in terms of its long-term impact, not really a
exactly.
big change. Okay.
Other question?
I think the encouraging thing about the whole business was, I mean, I've now heard this talk 4 times, so I remember different bits of it. But in the Edinburgh one, you said that the strike the wave that started in 2010 against austerity started after 20 years of apathy and
Relative apathy.
Relative apathy.
Yeah.
And it then came, has launched this, and although the students were slow to get the workers involved, the workers themselves got involved, and now today the workers are copying the student methods in their own strikes against wage cuts, unemployment and austerity. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about any of those.
Yeah, but I think you have 2 movements in Canada in general who can be interesting. You have a cut of unemployment insurance, of public unemployment insurance by the federal government, and you have a lot of fishermen especially who are affected by that. And now in some province like Newfoundland and New Brunswick, you have general strike at the level of a town by fishermen who shut down the city center, and they now have a black circle, with where like the student Red Square was not where by those fishermen Or the most interesting event in class struggle was during the student strike. I think in the last year, I talk about in my leaflet, why do we lose all the time? At the end, as an exemplary struggle, is a strike of Air Canada workers in the Toronto airport. Because you have in 2011 you have a special law against Air Canada workers saying they forbid them to strike because they're too vital to economy. For 5 years, they don't have any right to strike. And you have the Labour federal minister, a conservative, who walk in the Toronto airport, and 3 workers sarcastically applaud him. Those 3 workers strangely get fired 2 days after. Because of that, Toronto worker, ground worker of the airport walk out. Next day, Ottawa and Montreal ground worker walk out in solidarity, Wildcat. Edmonton, Vancouver follow the day after. On the Monday of the week after, all the pilots of Air Canada called sick. The majority of them all called sick for 1 day. The day after, the 2 workers are reintegrate, and the manager who fired them was fired for itself the day after. So I think that's an interesting thing, and it was during the student strike, and we tried to solidarize, but in 1 week it's difficult to make permanent link with people. But we have tried to solidarize that, but I think that's something start to happen a lot more in Quebec. You got a big strike in the shipyards in the New Brunswick because the suicide of fire workers in the shipyard are just have walkout spontaneously after the suicide of that. So these things start to happen, and now you have the idea of, because of this multiplication of wildcat or just legal strike, but who are more combative, you have now this idea that we need coordination outside of our historical coordination, who are unions. For the working class, we can deny that. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that are interesting in Canada now, and I think the student strike have played a little bit of a role in that, and giving this idea that now we need organization.
Just in terms of like filling some of the gaps, I think, in my understanding, especially around like these neighbourhood assemblies, like at what point during the student thing, like, did they emerge, and were they like initiated by students and then expanded, or did they emerge as like distinct from the student movement?
They emerged distinct from student movement.
Right.
I think the neighbourhood assembly, when they start, where some neighbourhood assembly were initiated by left militant, like Victor, who was a comrade of the IWG, start this neighbourhood assembly into his neighbourhood in Montreal. But some neighbourhood assembly pop out of nowhere by people we never see, or by really, you have an example, a lot of old, sorry for the expression, but all leftists of the 70s, we started to militate and start this neighbourhood assembly. We got in one neighbourhood in Montreal, the committee who formed the neighbourhood assembly of Ansic were 3 old members of Socialisme Barbarie who were 8 years old, and they create a general assembly woke up and was speaking today, you say I was a socialist in Barbarie, woke up, do you really say that? So yeah, or you have old Marxist Leninists and Maoists or old Trotskyists starting militing and drawing to them the next generation of militant, and you have this mix of experience into the neighborhood assembly, which is also something interesting.
I guess the other thing might be useful to kind of the relationship between the SSE and class. So the SSE is the one that's like a smaller, more politically unified like group that agitates within the universities, and then when there's like potentiality for any sort of like campaign or struggle, it's done through class. Then is that how that dynamic worked between those two bodies?
Not really, because ASE is really syndicalist in that way that they struggle a lot that can influence political organization in itself. At the beginning it was made that way because you have this social democratic thing was fighting to control the ASE, And basically the anarchists and Maoists were against political influence in the organization because of that, because it was a way to keep the reformists away. But you don't have, you have kind of an anti-politic, in the sense of anti-political organization sentiment into the assay because of that culture. So you don't have that body really, because assay is students, but assay is a union federation with, yes, more unified and also more left position, but class is really only for the strike, if you want to say that.
Right, so it's like a struggle organization.
Yeah, another way is a struggle expand, because assay expand for the duration of the struggle is really, I think only that exists in Quebec in the student movement. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well,
I don't think anything like us. I wrote down here.
yeah,
It's an organisation already prepared for a struggle before a struggle starts.
yeah.
Where would you hear it here? You know, it's just, I mean, we had a meeting in York, and the students there said that everybody's apathetic about the possible privatisation of the loan company, and nobody's really taken a great interest in fighting because this company on that now then have the restrictions on the rate of interest it can charge taken off it, and yet in Britain we don't seem to have a student movement like there was a few years
There are
ago.
two occupations at the moment precisely on that, but not in York, obviously.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I mean, York was
In
obviously
Birmingham,
the worst place to
as usual. The one next to Brighton.
Yeah, I think
Sussex.
South Africa. Sorry. Sussex.
it's maybe a weakness of the student English student movement on my side that they occupy before striking.
Right.
Because the fact is, the problem with notification, your course are still moving outside, and you don't have time, because if you occupy for a month, you're going to miss your course, miss your exam, miss your, are going to give your work, and you're going to that. If you strike, you have free time, and also the fact is, the capital need a mass of new qualified worker every year. Is the reason why capitalist society allowed university to exist, is because they knew that they have qualified need of capital worker every year to go in the labor market every year and job market every year. So shut down a university put pressure that, okay, maybe that year you're not going to have those mass of qualified worker into the market, and you're going to need them. So is that the point of a student strike, is to put pressure that?
Just out of interest, do they need, I mean, the problem obviously in Europe generally, some parts of Europe more than others, but certainly in Britain as well to some extent, is that they're churning out a lot of students for which there aren't any jobs, or at least if there are jobs, they're certainly not. And that affects everybody, because basically when your qualified student goes doing burgers in some other poor place, proletarian can't get a job, even flipping burgers, So, and that's a really big problem in Europe. But so when you say, well, you shut it down, but it went back. Yeah, maybe certainly in some economies, shutting it down. It's just like shutting down the factory that they're going to shut anyway. Or like a bit of a problem really, unless the struggle is expanded, is wider, becomes social, then actually the strike is. I don't know. Do you see what I mean? But I don't know what the situation is in Canada.
And I was going to say something in Canada. Is the general strike in 2012 student movement was the 8th general strike of the student movement. It was the most massive, the most combative, but also the most long. And I think the point you gave that is true. Our traditional means of fighting are less and less effective, especially for students, especially the 7 months. 7 months strike. In 1988, we got a general strike of 3 days, and the student won.
I mean, partly what you were saying, though, I mean, to the extent it had some success was because it did go outside the university and did seek to attack other economic targets. Even if a lot of them were attacking at the point of distribution and not always at the point of production, but it was still an attempt to disrupt the economy.
I agree with that, but even that don't put enough, because I think with the global organization of capital actually is a good way for the capitalist class to to break out struggle. Actually, because if workers are striking there, why not move their factory in that country now? You have that thing in student movement, the same thing. So yeah, but I think every year winning reformist and partial struggle has become difficult and difficult every time. For the student movement, that's what I think a step to take next strike would be to have a revolutionary program. It's easy to say.
I think you're talking about what are the gains of the movement. You know? And it seems as though the students things have just been frozen. But I want to agree with your conclusion and the gains of political gains. I think that's important. It's the gains in consciousness. I just want to emphasize this because in Quebec, one of the real problems, I think, for the students, but for the working class, is this whole question of nationalism, and also as well to be Quebecois. And this was deliberately used by the Canadian bourgeoisie to actually separate and to separate and divide the working class, particularly in Quebec, on the question of language.
Yeah.
I remember, 30 years ago, this whole issue was extremely strong. We had, for instance, the Maoist movement really supported the Quebecois movement, the movement for the separation, for some sort of national autonomy. And I think that one of the gains of the student movement, besides also attempting to move outside to the neighbourhood committees, which I think maybe we could talk a little bit more about that, but it is to actually break this. And I just want to emphasise that we're saying this is part of a movement which has taken place throughout the world. The Occupy movement, I think it is really important. The movement that I said before, the movement that we had in Turkey around Gezi Park, for instance, although it didn't directly challenge the union framework, etc. It was a movement which spread right across the population, and it was really important, and it was important for the working class. So this whole question of other sectors besides the working class, I think, is important. Or maybe you could develop on that about what happened in the student striking.
Okay, about the question of nationalism.
Nationalism, and also the difficulties to, for the student movement to reach out to the working class.
Okay, I will say for nationalism, the fact that for the first time in material condition, or the only fact that for the first time we have contact with English students, that helped, basically, or English-speaking students, because they're not really the old English bourgeoisie, but they were more Hindu or Sri Lankese or Arabic people speaking English than actual English. But in Quebec we call them bloke, I don't know is the other definition here, that term. An English speaker is a bloke in Quebec.
Bloke.
Yeah, that's a man or a woman. I know that you have another definition here. Yeah. So yeah, you have that. You have also this idea that, especially in the assay, you have this strong anti-nationalist sentiment, mainly made by anarchists and by Maoists, and that's really fun because the Maoists never support independence in Quebec, but outside of Quebec they all support independence. I always found that funny. Historically, Maoist movement never supported independence for Quebec. Outside of Quebec, Maoists generally support independence for Quebec. I never understand why.
Really?
Yeah. Even in the same international organization, is only the section of Quebec vote against independence. So yeah, you have that question. You have also the re-emergence of the native movement Native American movement who have made some Quebecers realize that they are also part of, I'll say, and that they are not only the only oppressed in Canada, they're not the only who live in national oppression, and they're part of that. Sometime of that, the Francophone bourgeoisie is also oppressor of the native people, and you have a lot more connection between the Anglo and the Francophone bourgeoisie than before. Now it's really normal to have, before you have a real, not a real contradiction, but you have friction between the Anglophone and the Francophone bourgeoisie. In the last 20 years, not really that friction, so you have more a common enemy now also, because the bourgeoisie is more united at a national scale than it was before, so we cannot identify with, for a lot of Francophone workers, they cannot identify with the national bourgeoisie anymore because they're shaking hands with their old enemy. So they try to find out, they have this idea to find ally into the English working class too, because now they have the same enemy who they cannot divide in the same old way. And for the difficulty to reaching other parts, I think a mistake of student was to not emphasize into common structure. We try in some college to have interprofessional assembly with caretakers and teacher and students in the same assembly that gives some interesting result, but the fact, I think only 3 colleges do that. Mine and what we call the Triumvirat in Montreal with Saint-Laurent, Vieux-Montréal, and Maisonneuve, who are the 3 more combative, historically the more combative college, do that. Or in Lionel Groux, the old Maoist student, for giving example, during the 70s, the student union were named the Student Marxist-Leninist Maoist Student Union of Cégep Lionel Groux. So it's the traditional leftist they have tentative to have common structure, but only 4 on 52 college who are in strike, only 4 of them try to have common structure. Another way I think is a more complicated version, but is a new difficulty into the class struggle, is the recomposition of the working class in the last 30 years. The working class have really 2 major distinctions now into the central country, western country, call them as you like. You have this old industrial working class, really more classic, or public sector workers, steel workers, miners, dock workers, manufacturing workers. And you have also this new, what I say, creative working class who are more in research and development, who work in labs, who are a designer, who are in informatician, something like that, with a class who produce ID more than traditional material product. And you have a lot to play in, and the fact is that part of the working class, the creative class, is more related to the student, but ideologically have tendency to distance itself from the old working class. They all say, example, an informatician will not identify himself spontaneously with a steel worker, is middle class. You have this whole idea into this creative class, the ideology of the middle class is still present, and the student have tendency to relate more with the creative class because generally they study to have one of those jobs. So and I think neighborhood assembly are good for that in part because they bring together members of the creative class and the working class because territorial way, because generally the 2 working class are equally poor, so the neighborhood with the same type of rent regroup the 2 classes together. So we have to now, I think in the working class we have to focus a bit more on territorial way to organize than the traditional communist cell and factory. They're still relevant, but I think now we have to also to put more territorial group and territorial world type of unity with this new composition of the working class. And I think it's that also a failure student movement to focus only on campuses. More example, why the college, my college is in the Hochelaga Maisonneuve, was the 2nd poorest neighborhood in North America, if you exclude Mexico. The Bronx is just before us, You're more wealthy if you live in the Bronx, and that's like why the CEGEP didn't achieve to be a rally point to all the proletariat in that neighborhood. I think that can be interesting because it was basically just CEGEP was under control for the strike, was on being a big milieu to regroup people to organize struggle. That should be kind of interesting in the future to do it. So yeah, that's my answer to those questions.
I think you made a good comment about this kind of territory and organising that way, because there's a complete difference now with where our workplaces are. Some people's shop floor, their work floor is actually their bedroom.
Yeah.
So there's less likely how we communicate, how we would organise. Although they might work for the same industry, they might actually work for the same company as an employer. They're all dotted around. It's actually how do they communicate. And there has been examples of people overcoming that by using technology, video calling and so on. And that can be used even in an office floor where everyone's so disconnected they actually can't organise. How do you, I don't know, probably a bit more of an open one, but how to actually, because you said this is obviously an issue, it is a difficult point of departure from the previous struggle we've discussed. Do you have ideas? Has there been ideas that have come from that, from your comrades in Quebec or people you spoke to in this country who've had similar issues and difficulties?
I will play a little bit my bourgeois liberal play today. Facebook is great for organizing sometimes. But yes, social network can be used. They are not how you need more than that, but there's some time a way to break that atomization that the capital imposed on your life by a new organization of work. Also, you have all those struggles who are not related to the workplace, but have still incidents. We still pay our bread over price. We're still paying astronomical rent for a shitty flat and everything like that. I think if you try to put in common, because you have the capital can totally atomize us. We still have to walk to buy our bread. We still have to walk to go somewhere in our life. I think if you try to organize some struggle around those places, around the price in the supermarket, around just pollution in the air pollution or traffic pollution or something like that, can be interesting to regroup those people who are not in the same workplace anymore, is to find a common problem that still relate them even if their workplace have been atomized. I think that is a clue to act in that direction.
So you think the neighbourhood assemblies that actually arose because they had common interests, it still would have been the difficulty of workplaces being completely different?
Yeah.
Do you feel that was actually something that arose because it was necessary?
Yeah, I think so, because now, for example, in my neighborhood, the main fight we're doing is for food access. We're fighting because supermarket throw voluntarily away a part of their food they receive to artificially raise the price. So we want to we say, okay, if you can't sell that part of the food, give us free to the population. Now, as we're fighting against that, we're fighting against rents hike because you have massive rent hike, everything like that. So, yeah, neighborhood assembly are now on that fighting on that ground, and they're bringing people to them because of that fight, because you still identify with those people, with those things.
And you're linking the neighbourhood assemblies with some of the picket lines as well?
Yeah, some picket line in the factory, and some worker try right now, example, in Mappy, Laval, they have connect with the neighborhood assembly in Laval and try to, now the struggle in Mappy is lost, the strike is finished. But for a short time, they've tried to spread the struggle through the neighborhood with their neighborhood assembly. And that's, if that thing is made earlier in the struggle, because Mappy, every good thing in Mappy strike happened the strike lasts for 2 years. And you have only interesting thing happen in the last 3 months. But in the next struggle, with that experience, if that thing come earlier, that can be, so I think we can have interesting results in Quebec. And yeah, I think it's that. And maybe in UK, we're going to have interesting result with those methods too.
I guess this is just coming from my perspective as someone who's recently graduated, but the British student movement would never mention the term strike unless it was solely related to a workplace, a traditional form of strike. And the British student movements, protests, seem to generally be a one-day walk through central London, or sometimes not even central London in the last one. But whereas Quebec seems to have a history of student strikes, which seem to be more of a long-term, conscious refusal of work as studying. Where do you think that arose, and why do you think it seems to be developed in Quebec rather than anywhere else?
I think in that way problem you can see historical background help, but we have the same conception of it's not exactly the same, but we're really close to French Union movement or Spanish student movement or Italian student movement who actually strike too. But the fact is, I think in Quebec it's really normal for a student to consider itself as a worker, someone who work, not as a proletarian, but someone who work, because it's not because you pay your fees that the knowledge will stay in your head. You have to actually study and do an intellectual work. And it's that Charte de Grenoble chart was the foundation of student unionism at the end of the Second World War, who bring in France. The first statute of the Charte de Grenoble is the student is an intellectual worker in formation. That's the basic point of what a student is. And I think Quebec is really deep into student culture, not just student movement, but for students in general, that idea that we are intellectual worker in formation. So if we strike, but it's because we're negotiate our formation of future worker. And I think maybe it's a point that is really cultural thing to do, but maybe for the student movement in England, it's a way to manage things, or to try to have some point on that. I don't know, it's really abstract as a concept, but maybe you have something to play with that.
I think if you ask most British students, they identify themselves as a service user, not an intellectual worker in formation. And if they identify themselves as a worker, it would be the part-time or full-time work they do to support themselves, i.e. in a shop or in a bar, or even working in the university itself as just in a student shop or whatever. And I mean PhD students do basically form part of a tutor, they teach undergraduates. So I mean maybe there, but then they're already pretty much fully formed intellectuals by the time you're doing a PhD. I don't think that's really been a thing within the British student movement.
No, I kind of agree, because I remember during, I forget exactly when it was, it's pretty much a blur now, but when there was the UCU strikes, I think last year, the year before, and I remember going to along to support and stuff for it and stuff, and students would come up and they'd be asked, don't cross the picket line and stuff, and people would honestly look down at the ground for a line. That's how absent in their mental conception of the world these kind of things are. So that's the level at which the general populace of the student population approach the conception of work and stuff like this. And but yeah, I think the point is that being a student today in Britain is a lot different from being a student in 1960s, 1970s. Because I think most students are workers. They work to fund it and stuff like this. So even if you left aside the whole worker information thing, most students have to work anyway. So it's part of life.
Yeah, but I don't think I'm able to give total answer to that thing. But I think the point of reflection on a really really grounded thing will be to try to strike, maybe, I don't know, not maybe on a university level, but generally in Quebec when a strike starts in university is that gender study department with this sociology department, the undergrad or the grad go on strike for one day and they're followed by everything. I think the beginning for that will be for some radical student in the UK to try for X reason in some department to organize a general assembly and an actual strike. I think can be a beginning of that, because class consciousness is not in the head of the worker when he's go out of the belly of his mother. Class consciousness is built by a section of material reality, but also struggle. And I think for students, the idea that I think in Quebec we're not striking because we think we're intellectual worker information. I think we think we're intellectual worker information because we strike. Is the reverse thing we are doing. I think maybe it's the idea that in England, if you start to have students strike about economical issue or political issue who are related to student life, you can start to build that idea that you are not a service user because you're not boycotting, you're striking.
I took part in an occupation in 1968 of the LSE, and we went on strike as well. We closed the university for 3 days, I think. I can't remember. It was a long weekend with no sleep, as I recall. But I was quite disgusted by most of the students I was involved with, because I thought they were just playing games. You know, they were like the future managerial class, just posing. But what was interesting was that dockers came up to the LSE and started telling us we were a load of shiftless, idle layabouts. And they were the most interesting ones to listen. They all got applauded. They were the most interesting ones to listen to, and they were the ones that actually made me think, you know, that this was just a fairly self-indulgent thing. And of course, what happened was, by the time I left university in 1970, the crisis was really beginning to hit, and it was beginning to hit the rest of the working class. And the working class began a wave of strikes, the like of which we hadn't seen for decades, and it lasted for about 6 years. You know, the famous electricity strikes that shut down the power stations, the -1-2 strikes in 72 and 74. The government actually went to the polls in 74, actually saying that the issue is who runs the country, a bit like Charest, you know, say to the Quebecers, now you can vote against the students, and in fact people voted for them. And the Tory government of Heath lost in 74. So yeah, things have, I think the point that things are different, but how are they different? I'm not quite, this is what I'm trying to get a grasp of. It seems to me that we've had a crisis of capital accumulation that's gone on since the 70s. It's not been resolved, it's been managed. The last trick, of course, was speculative bubbles, the financialisation of everything, and the creation of false notion that there was growth throughout the 1990s and the 2000s. This has gone arse over tit with the fact that, as a lot of people predicted it would do, with the bursting of the speculative bubble. But in the course of the time since I was a student, what has happened is that, as Ronan just said, the student body's been proletarianised in the sense that working class students, when I went to university, it was only 2% of us who came from the working class. But nowadays, when I was a school teacher, I realised that the whole name of the school teaching game was that 50% of the kids I had to get to university and 50% of the kids I could forget about. And that's what they were trying to turn the schools into. And it was quite clear, the kids who knew that they weren't going to get 5 grade C's at GCSE, they stopped. They didn't do anything. They understood it as well. And we've got a situation where we now have 38% of the population go to university, right, which is quite an incredible percentage to my mind. The government, of course, couldn't afford to give people grants as they did to us to do that. So they had to go over to the student loan business. You now leave university, a comrade of ours, his son has left university with a debt of £37,000, which to me sounds like, I'd commit suicide if I had £37,000 of debt. But then I suppose on a pension it's not a good idea. It strikes me that the system each year is turning out a new generation of graduates, more and more, highly qualified, the best educated that we've ever had, and nothing for them, or very little for them to come into. And I think this is what will lay behind the Occupy movements in Spain, the Arab Spring, the Indignados movements. That they're a reflection of the fact that millions of intelligent human beings can't be absorbed by this system. And I don't see them solving that particular problem. Even if they wriggle out by another speculative dodge this time, this problem of creating a youth that is educated but not able to be employed other than, as Mike said, flipping burgers or doing something that's below what they're creatively developed to do, is, I think, going to create a social crisis in the system.
Some countries already.
And of course, in some countries it is. In fact, the country I seem to know least about is Britain. I think what's happening here. We don't seem to have the same anger response, and the number of young people who must be leaving university with enormous debts and who are fairly sanguine about it. Must be one of the ways that the system somehow manages to carry on and carry on.
Question?
We've got 20 minutes left. So.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't the student movement in Britain, when they were trying to actually impose the fees, etc., incredibly radical, occupying universities, etc., it suddenly seemed to burst out of nowhere. And most certainly, I was really surprised by it. Some of the demonstrations in Liverpool, but it's true what the comrade is saying, that students are really proletarianised. It's not just in this country, but it's particularly in Spain and in France. We can see that the students are, comrade said, intellectual workers in the making. But the thing is that they're actually graduating to actually go on the dole. It's just, in that sense, they're becoming proletarianised. I think we should get away from the old conception that somehow they're essentially middle class and they have a particular individualistic approach to politics and to struggle.
I wondered what your attitude. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on your approach to the involvement of other. How can I put it? People with other political organisations that obviously played a part in these activities. Because although you referred to a lot of them, I was interested when you mentioned the assemblies, and somebody said, "Well, who started them? How did they start?" And you said, "Well, some of them, as far as you could tell, were like just spontaneous. Well, nothing's ever entirely spontaneous. Somebody takes the initiative."
Yeah.
So it might have just been, now who were these people? And then you said, well, some of them were just sort of old radicals from the 70s, suddenly popped up, got enthusiastic and did something. But all of these people would not necessarily be of our political persuasion. The important thing, which is what you were stressing, seemed to be the form of the organisation at the level of militancy and the extent to which people were trying to break out of old forms of struggle and old forms of activity. But it is interesting, of course, isn't it, that these things are not generated by communists. The communists might be some of the people that play a part in it, but some of them might be of no political persuasion, some of them might be religious, some of them might be lefties that we are otherwise find we're in opposition to for all sorts of other reasons. I just wondered how you see that. I mean, I think we probably all experience it in some workplace situations where we might. I mean, I've not been involved in many strikes and things, but I remember one of the very few sort of strikes that started off as a union struggle with one union, then picketed out various people from different unions. And I remember we had a real kind of job to ensure that the strike committee and the assembly was made up of all strikers irrespective of whether which union they're in or whether they're in any union. And we did that, but a lot of the people, for instance, that argue that support, although that came from me and individuals with my kind of politics, some of the other people that supported it were like people in the SWP, things like that. Otherwise I'd be opposed to it, but they supported that particular move at that particular time, and it was the right thing to do. I doubt if they learned any big lessons out of that subsequently. You know what I mean? But it was still the right thing at the right time. And that, you know what I mean? Just how you view that kind of process and the other people's politics in it.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. Actually, the fact, you have for the General Assembly who initiate them, the neighborhood assembly. Sometimes was students, sometimes people from spontaneously. You speak about religious, I know that two neighborhood assemblies are actually created by the local Catholic priest who started the assembly. But first I will say that the working class itself has still have this idea of struggle in itself and have a potential of combativity that results in material condition. The only real question we can have as Marxists is not why people will revolt. We know why they should revolt, why we don't. But actually I think because of the student strike that created an opening on the political field of people who were massively involved in politics, and just it was really difficult to go in a bar or a restaurant and don't hear talking about a strike by some people everywhere, but people start to get involved in politics because politics was surrounding them every moment, and I think that's maybe the way, and they see, okay, but some people were a little bit sympathizer with the students saw General Assembly, so yeah, I can create a General Assembly in my workplace, why not try to my neighborhood or something like that. I don't know exactly what was the intellectual process behind every assembly, but the thing is because of this political opportunity that a student strike create, that people start, okay, we need our own struggle, because we see that capitalist is, or the actual economy and economic and political system is giving nothing what we should have, and what just basically what we materially need to survive. Is that? Yeah, but I don't know if that answered your question, but it's the best I can get.
I'll let you off with that one.
Okay.
Unduly charitable.
Michael, when it comes down to it, some of the most prolific revolutionary writers and thinkers are actually were really good at getting other people's opinions and ideas down together in a concise way they can share. And it seems in struggle, those who seem to be quite prominent are actually just the best ones to convey ideas that are all around them. In these assemblies, how much do you find there was actually ideas from those who weren't political before, fully don't even class themselves political, but came up with great tactical ways to continue the struggle, to set out a strategy to work towards, and how much did you find there was a lot of negative surprise that came from
the surprise of people not really political. You have a lot of that. That's true. You have a lot of people in either they struggle for the first time. Some people were at the first demo in the Casserole, the first demo of their life. They joined the neighborhood assembly, and now they're really great militant. And it was the first time they do politics in their life. So it was surprising, but honestly, I can't exactly say where they come, except from general working class background they have in common. But also I can say, they had an idea, but they had an idea because neighborhood assembly were rapidly invest, or if they not create but radical militant, or people have the ABC of radical militancy. So I think those people, so sometimes I think as a revolutionary we just put the right word on people thought, on people emotion about the system. So I think what the action of the militant, radical militant in the Neighbourhood Assembly was basically just give political expression to anger that many people have, and that's why that come out basically on form that we find interesting, and that come out too, because yes, we have those great militants, but we also non-political person who are terrible, and were just bullet in our foot during all the existence of the assembly, because they want a kind of open space to discuss, and people who are just talking about their personal problem in those assemblies, and there was so many so painful sometimes. Yeah, but we have also that, so you have the worst and the best in those general assembly. Yeah, and even for the political, we have people who are militant, who are just a pain in the ass.
Our comrades in Turkey from the International Communist Current, they were involved in the Gezi Park movement. And at first they were really suspicious about the movement because it was a massive movement right across Turkey. And they actually thought that it was an interclassist movement, that it was a movement that was really which was drowned in the working class were actually present on the demonstrations, etc. But they were really drowned by the other sectors, particularly young people and people who are unemployed, students, etc. And they had to realise that that the crisis is actually really hammering them as well. And the whole question, what the comrade was talking about, the proletarianisation of different sectors, of the students particularly, I think it is an important process to actually understand. And it's the same with the indignados and the assembly movement in France. That it's going to draw different sectors, but all of the sectors are actually under the same, that they're under attack from the crisis. I think it's an important concept to understand.
Thanks for that. If we're reaching an artistic conclusion as well as the end of the time that we've got allocated, I'd just like to thank everybody for their contributions, and also all of it, Alexis for his introduction. I think I took a lot of heart. I've now heard this 4 times, talk, so each time I've got slightly more enthusiastic about what went on in Quebec, and I just hope it's a reflection of what's going to happen in other places. I think so far our ruling class have learned from their poll tax debacle not to have a concerted issue on which they attack everybody. You might be attacked on the bedroom tax, you might be attacked on your pension, you might be attacked on your student loan, but they're all seen as separate ones. And of course, the propaganda is that we're all got separate issues. Us baby boomers are living it up rich, whilst the poor students of today are paying for our pensions, which seems to ignore the fact that we've already paid for our pensions. But this is the kind of propaganda that we're getting. But I think, as Laurie has just said, the crisis isn't going away, and the attacks are continuing. And even in the area where I live, in the northeast, we're beginning to see people get together on a very ad hoc basis to just fight anything that is seen as a form of austerity, and they're even talking about preventing people being evicted because of the bedroom tax, taking action to stop that, which is like going back to the 1930s when the whole street used to turn out the bailiffs tried to evict you. So who knows, we may even see some of that in 2014, but certainly I think
glorification of the war, 1914.
That's another issue we'll be working on, but watch this space. But hopefully we'll have our own form of response in a much more clear and direct fashion. Anyway, thank you for coming. Oh, I should point out there's publications of the Free Communist here. Laurie, have you put yours away?
Yeah.
And the Communist Workers' Organisation in the corner.